Hello, YouTube. This is Mike, and this is the 4 things that heal BPD and NPD abuse. Welcome to the channel if you're new to the channel. And I want to talk to you again about quiet borderline personality disorder and whether or not quiet borderline personality disorder is a milder, less destructive form of BPD when it comes to relationships. So before I go any further, if you've been, this channel is devoted to people who have been in relationships with somebody who suffers from BPD and or NPD. There are people who come onto this channel who do have personality disorders, and of course you're welcome to be here, but just be aware that this channel is not for you. It's not designed for you. It's designed to give people who have been damaged in these relationships a place to constructively heal. So the 4 things, if you've been in one of these relationships, the 4 things that heal you, in my experience, this is what I share with you, is what worked for me, is to go complete no contact, is to work all 12 steps of Codependence Anonymous with a sponsor. I didn't say go to meetings and like it. I said work all 12 steps with a sponsor. Number 3, work with a psychologist when you can afford it. And number 4, have some kind of meditative practice in your life. In my experience and in my observation, if you do those 4 things, especially 1 and 2, which are non-negotiable, then in my experience, you will heal from that relationship. I'm completely healed from the damage that happened with me in the relationship that I was in. I hold 0 negative feelings. I also don't hold any loving feelings. I don't have any attached feelings one way or another. I do have compassion for her, to be honest with you. I have a lot of compassion for, how sad it is for especially undiagnosed, untreated borderlines, what life is like. They desperately want love, and it's a very challenging place to be. And I have to just say, before I go any further, I am responding to some people who were giving comments about my video about Amber Heard and whether or not I think she has BPD. And that was before what's been going on today, which is today there have been court hearings where broadcast to the whole world, Amber Heard has to sit there in court while a psychologist diagnoses her as a borderline and talks about her being a borderline and having histrionic personality disorder. And I had nothing but compassion for her. I believe Johnny Depp was abused. I believe that he was probably really traumatized and abused because he married her, and I know what it's like to fall in love with a borderline, get deeply attached, and then go through all of the really horrific abuse that occurs. So I'm not saying that either of them are good or bad. I'm just saying, even though I know that I believe he's telling the truth, and I do believe that the doctor is accurate, that she is in fact does have BPD and histrionic personality disorder. I really feel for her because she's not an evil person. She suffers from a mental illness. And I really don't believe that she consciously intended to do any of the damage that she did. People are writing on here some really immature and uneducated things. Did she psychopathically abuse him at times? No two ways about it, yes. Does that mean that she planned it out and she loved doing it? No. If she dissociated and forgot, maybe she doesn't even know she did it. If she does remember, I can guarantee you that she felt really horrifically guilty. How she responded to that guilt, by either covering it up or overcompensating or refusing to acknowledge any guilt or turning around and taking that self-blame and projecting it onto him, making things worse, I don't know. But it's really, I have to say, it's immature and childish for people to brand her as evil and taking things like she said this and she did that when she's in a psychopathic reactive rage and say she has no love, she never loved him. So very hurt, childish, untreated codependent who talks like that. So if you're one of those people and you're getting pleasure out of Amber Heard being raked over the coals and literally being, the camera is on her while she's, sitting there traumatized while somebody is saying that she's, got a severe mental illness and all of that. If you don't have any compassion for, how sad that is for her, then I have compassion for you. That's sad for you. It's very sad for her, and I really feel for her. And I really wish that somebody had made it so that all of this was done behind closed doors and that the entire public didn't have to hear what I listened to, which was, a doctor saying that she had histrionic personality disorder and naming all the things that aren't very pleasant about BPD. So having said that, let's talk about quiet BPD because that's come up again. Now, I have already made a video about quiet BPD and you can look for it. And I think it's something along the lines of, is quiet BPD the kinder, gentler form of BPD? And I think I may entitle this video, Do People with BPD Understand the damage that they cause? And let's be clear, I know that many BPDs, if not most, are aware when they split, they sometimes go through tremendous guilt. But that doesn't mean that they fully understand. Borderline personality disorder is a mental illness. And part of that mental illness is you've got people who are very self-absorbed. It's not their fault, it's not a judgment, that's just a fact of the symptoms. So when you're self-absorbed, it means that you don't truly have an objective ability to see what's going on and the effects of your behavior. Obviously, if you part of the time, the self-directed guilt that borderlines have isn't an awareness, an actual awareness of the effects of their behavior. It could also just be that they are abusing themselves because internally they have all of this self-directed shame. So they feel shameful for anything. And so just because a borderline is filled with self-absorbed and guilt over something, it doesn't mean that they truly understand what they did or what the effects are. And I'm going to prove it to you. So somebody says here about this new video, which probably will turn out to be my most popular video, most likely because this is all over the media. Someone says here, BPD must be very sad to experience, but 100% do not get into a relationship with someone with BPD. Very dangerous, very destructive. I had 2 years of it. Have compassion, of course, but from at least 3 permanent miles away. So this is somebody who's been with a borderline and he's sharing his experience, and his suggestion is do not get into a relationship with someone who has BPD. I have to generally agree with him. I mean, if in doubt, somebody has BPD, whether they're diagnosed or not, the safe thing to do is don't get involved because, just because somebody's in treatment doesn't mean that they are able to, that they're able to resist their impulses. Being aware of it doesn't necessarily give you the ability to have any recovery. But I also know that I shouldn't say I know, because I haven't thoroughly investigated it enough to really say I know. But I believe, based on some of the things that I've seen, that I do believe that some borderlines, if they put a real hefty amount of effort and time into some therapy, that I believe that it may be possible for some of them to be in relationships and act in healthy, constructive, loving ways, and or create a healthy dynamic with their partner, you know, through therapy and through working with each other. So I'm going to say, this is my guess. I can't say it for a fact. My guess is that the percentage of those are very small, and that for the most part, the last thing you want to do is get into a romantic relationship with somebody who has BPD because of the nature of the mental illness that it is. Now, Amber Heard, I don't know how, you know, what exact type of BPD she has, because I got to be honest with you, these 4 types of BPD, I mean, they're interesting, but it's sort of like talking about people's hair color or eye color. You know, you're still a human. Because the thing that does not go away, no matter what type of borderline you are, the thing that does not go away is the splitting. That never changes. The only thing that changes is how they express that. Some of them, like Amber Heard, apparently gets very angry and gets very violent. You know, based on what I've heard, she was extremely physically abusive, throwing things, punching him, verbally abusive. You know, these are things. Now, I got to say, the kind of person that I am, she would not be the kind of borderline I would end up with. But having said that, I didn't date her, so I don't know. Based on the way Johnny Depp describes it, it looks like it went on for a year before she started splitting. So who knows? Maybe I could have ended up in that. But the moment that things got, you know, really physically, verbally abusive, or, God help somebody if they want to, you know, get physically abusive with me. Not that I would fight back, but the moment that I got, that would be it. There's just no discussion. I mean, one physical abuse on me and that's it. It's over. I don't care. So that's me, though. Not everybody. You're obviously a different person. Everybody's different. So that's really what we're getting into. We're getting into, you know, is there such a thing as a quiet borderline that isn't as bad, that isn't abusive? So I already shared with you this guy's thought that he expresses compassion for borderlines, but says, whatever you do, don't get in a relationship with them. And then somebody responds. This is a borderline. This person says, this comment is very dangerous and destructive. Not everyone with BPD are like her. I have BPD. It's a spectrum. Please educate yourself. All right. So this person doesn't specifically say why or how she's different. And I can't really argue with that either. That I don't know how destructive or dangerous his comment is. It is extreme, and it is it makes a caricature out of borderlines, and it does it is a sweeping generalization. But as I said, if in doubt, I would agree with him. Don't get involved. But that doesn't mean that as I said, that's all there is to know. So I agree with her. Not everyone with BPD are like her, and BPD is a spectrum, and people should educate themselves. I think that's all a good suggestion. So he responds, or somebody else responds. No, he responds. And he responds back to this person and says, "No, I'm sorry. It's simply not worth the risk. Do you honestly think any other advice should be given? How does someone know where their interest might be on the spectrum? Given enmeshment and how difficult it is to end these relationships, as well as how incredibly dangerous they can be, the only fair advice is to give 100% do not get involved. The only fair advice to give is 100% do not get involved. Do you honestly think people should take a risk?" All right, so again, it's his opinion, and he's obviously been hurt and damaged, and as I said, if in doubt, that's pretty good advice. I'm not saying he's 100% right, but so far it's a worthwhile, and I didn't step in because it's a worthwhile discussion. Somebody else jumps in, and this person also has BPD, and this person says, I have quiet BPD and react at myself when upset, take emotions out on myself. It's harmful to a relationship in the sense I become withdrawn and isolate, which isn't what a partner would be used to or can sometimes understand. But with therapy and communication and trust, it can be easily worked through. He goes on to say, I don't hit my partner, I don't insult or belittle my partner, I don't abuse anyone, but occasionally myself. Not every person, this person says, not every person with borderline personality disorder is abusive to their partners. That's worth looking into. Not every person with BPD lets their illness have all the control. A lot of people put in the work to have healthy relationships. Your statement is pretty much saying people with BPD shouldn't be allowed to have healthy relationships, and that's gross, laugh out loud. If you don't have the capacity to be with someone, and now he's now going to contradict himself and he's going to get abusive. See, you were good up until that point. You're sharing your thoughts and your feelings, and now you're going to attack somebody. You're going to show zero amount of empathy for them and have at least let them have their pain. Now you're going to attack them. So I hadn't read this whole thing, but here you are. You are now showing that somebody with quiet BPD can in fact be abusive because you got your feelings hurt. Let's see. Your statement is pretty much saying people with BPD shouldn't be allowed to have healthy relationships, and that's gross, laugh out loud. If you don't have the capacity to be with someone who has trauma and BPD, then don't be. Please do not waste our time, laugh out loud. Don't tell everyone else, though, that it isn't worth the risk. We're human, not just an illness. So, listen, I was with you right up until then. Right up until you turned around and got abusive and you made it personal. Then you actually just contradicted everything you said because based on that, my quiet BPD friend, I know what's going to happen when you're in a relationship and you get your feelings hurt. You're going to be passive aggressive or you're going to be outrightly abusive. What you just did was abuse that guy for him having an opinion. He wasn't saying anything horrible. He was saying, my advice is don't get involved with somebody who has BPD. It's not worth the risk. It's too painful. He has reason to back that up. You and I would agree that there are some people with borderline personality disorder that are very destructive. He's obviously been through a lot. So you had me. I hadn't read the whole comment and I was ready to be there with you, but anyway, we'll come back at this. So sorry, I'm not making any names here. So the other original responder comes back and says exactly what the previous person said. I also have quiet BPD. Let me see. Do I want to read all of the personal things? I don't think I want to read people's personal stuff. Goes on to say, I had self-hatred, was self-destructive. I didn't know who I was and I didn't know how to help myself. Since then, I received the diagnosis, have proper medication, and go to therapy so that I can address what is causing me so much despair. I am a total lover and a people pleaser. Hurting others causes me so much pain, so I avoid it at all costs. There are really 4 subtypes of BPD, quiet just being one. Then talking about the other person, the fact that you classify all BPD as this abhorrent thing that should leave all sufferers alone and unloved shows your ignorance and really your lack of compassion. All right, that's worth looking at. It goes on to say, I understand that there are more severe cases of BPD, and if that person is not willing to work through their disorder, then yeah, they may always have had bad relationships. Moreover, many that are diagnosed seek treatment because they are self-aware and want to have healthy relationships. All right, so people with BPD are just wired differently. If both parties are interested in a relationship, some education and acceptance. All right. So, as I said, I'm not opposed to what this person is saying. I don't have a lot of experience and I haven't researched it. I did research one case that convinced me. Well, I shouldn't say convinced me. I researched one case that led me to believe that it was possible. And in that case, that person had BPD, and that person on their own, not in a relationship, on their own, if I remember correctly, had come to the realization that their behavior in relationships and in life was causing them too much pain and they wanted to be happy. So they, for their own sake, sought out therapy, and they were very aggressive. So this was like somebody who was, I believe, was training to become, they're taking that perfectionism. They were training to be an athlete, and they were taking that perfectionism and they were putting it towards their recovery, which I think is very healthy. And as a result of that, this person goes to therapy once a week at least, DBT therapy, goes to group therapy once a month, I believe, at least, if not more, maybe even more than that. Every single day takes out the DBT workbook and does the work, the exercises every single day. And as a result of that work, that daily work, they are able to maintain a healthy relationship. And I would have to say, if I were to get in a relationship with somebody that had BPD, that would have to be the model. They would have to be, number one, completely self-motivated for their own happiness and in therapy for themselves. They would have to be in a therapy that actually works, that gives them the ability to handle their symptoms and be fully aware that they have a mental illness that can be extremely destructive. They would need to be in group therapy on a regular basis, and they would need to be doing that, every single day, getting out the workbook and doing exercises, because the way that I see this, I believe it's going to be, this is again just my opinion, but I think it would need to be handled the same way somebody deals with type 1 diabetes. If you don't take insulin every day, guess what? You can't eat normal food. If you've got BPD, it's never going to go away. You have to learn how to manage the symptoms. And that's what it's all about. So the question isn't whether or not they can cure themselves of BPD. I don't believe that's possible. Do they have the ability to find the appropriate therapy and do that every single day? Do I think that is possible? I do believe that it's possible. As I said, I think percentage-wise it's very unlikely. Now, let me get to the comment here of both of these people. There's one, we'll say one neurotypical who had a bad experience and is understandably saying, do not get involved with people who have BPD. They will hurt you every time. I would say that's probably true a lot of the time. And it's good advice. If in doubt, don't do it. Unless you know exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then we've got two quiet BPDs. And I would say one of them doesn't truly understand, because that's my question. Do people with BPD understand? I don't think this person truly understands. So let me just be clear. I am going to say quiet BPD, without a doubt, is easily just as horrifically traumatizing and destructive. And so if your definition of a destructive borderline is somebody who yells and who verbally assaults you and who physically assaults you, who insults you, who when they're angry, they take their anger out on other people. If you think that is a destructive BPD, but if you, because you take that rage and you turn it inwards, and according to you, you don't lash out at other people, you think that you're not harming people. And you couldn't be further from the truth. It means that you've got a ways to go. Keep up with your therapy. I'm glad that you're in it, but you got to keep up with it. But and let me just take little bits and pieces here, just what somebody says. So this isn't I'm not trying to make anybody look or feel bad, but we're here to learn and we're here to help each other. So this person says, I have quiet BPD and react at myself when upset. Here's the thing. Every single borderline does that. When somebody is lashing out at somebody, it's because they have first had rage at themselves. In fact, they are projecting their self-directed rage on somebody else. So it's not like you're different than them in this scenario. The only thing that's different is what you do with that self-directed rage. Your response, according to you, assuming that your self-assessment is accurate, and again, many borderlines do not have accurate self-assessment. If your self-assessment is accurate, according to you, you have the same response as the violent, abusive borderline, but you turn it inward. And you think that that makes it okay. That therefore, since you're only hurting yourself, nobody else gets hurt by that. And that shows a lack of understanding, because that's just not true. Let me just give you an example. Isolating, because you mentioned that. You say, it's harmful to a relationship, taking emotions out on yourself. It's harmful to a relationship in the sense I become withdrawn and isolate. And then you're minimizing the damage that it's doing to somebody else, or you may honestly not know. I think it might be the latter. I become withdrawn and isolate, which isn't what a partner would be used to or can sometimes understand. And that is an inaccurate assessment of what you're doing to the other person. The way you describe that, somebody would be like, why is that person isolating? I'm not sure I understand that. Or, oh, how sad. I wish that they were out here with me watching television. Oh, well, when they'll come out and it'll be okay. And that's not what happens. There's a difference. There's a difference between somebody who is taking time for themselves. That is a healthy thing to do. It shows healthy boundaries, but that's not what you're talking about. What you're talking about is actually you're full of rage. You're actually full of rage at the other person, and you are focusing on yourself. You somewhere learned in your upbringing that you weren't allowed to, or you decided that a good strategy would not be to express your rage outwardly, so you turned it inward. It doesn't change. The reaction is the same. You're full of rage. That's BPD. You're full of rage and hostility and anger, and that is not the same as somebody who just needs some time to be themselves and take a hot bath and take a walk. That's totally different. Because even though you've isolated, and it's good you're not yelling at somebody or hurting them or attacking them or berating them, that's good, but it doesn't change the fact that that's still going on inside of you. And we still feel it. And as it came out in this comment, every single time that you isolate, every single time that you get angry at yourself, telling yourself, I'm a good person, I'm not getting mad at them, I'm just going to get mad at me. Every single time you do that, you harm the people around you. Doesn't matter that you didn't yell at them. We still get the same exact, let me just say this, I want you to hear this, you quiet BPDs. And I hope that you take this and go get therapy, not, feel bad about it. But I want to completely destroy this idea that you have that I'm not like them because I don't throw things and I'm not violent and I don't yell. The devaluation we feel is identical. The trauma that we feel is identical. So I'm not going to co-sign this because I know from personal experience, I was with somebody who was a quiet borderline. And they did exactly what you're talking about. In fact, what she would do, among other things, She would do things like ghost me, disappear, uh, things like that. Isolate in her room for weeks at a time, not respond, not, no communication. Um, but she would also, when we were together, like if we were, living together in the same house, she would go into the bedroom, close the door, and stay in there for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. And she would say, I'm going to go meditate. What was happening is I could see it. She would be idealizing me, and she would be doing the things that borderlines do, which is great when it feels good. And then you could see that she would start to come up. Things were starting to come apart. And she would say, I'm going to go meditate. And she would go off into the bedroom and close the door and be in there for hours. And what she was doing, to her credit, she really was trying to work through her splitting. It must have been very challenging and very difficult. The way she described it was that she got very sensitive, and she needed to go and put her skin back on, something like that. But what she would do is she would go meditate, and she would play a guided meditation. Bear in mind, I think she's meditating. I think she's sitting in full lotus, and I think she's doing what I consider to be meditation. She's not. She's doing a guided meditation. And it's somebody telling her, where to focus energy on her body. And she's doing the same meditation over and over and over again. And it was not pleasant to be around. It felt bad to me, just that. She did a bunch of other really destructive things, but it didn't feel good. There was just this heaviness about all of it. So I'm sorry that you think that just because you withdraw and isolate that people might not understand. And if we just understood you more, it's not healthy behavior. It's not constructive behavior. It devalues the other person. And there's no way that you're doing that and also not being passive aggressive or outright demeaning. And you did it here. You had no compassion for this man, who, I agree with you, he's taking an extreme stance, but there's no doubt in my mind he's been traumatized, and good for him. He took care of himself. Can we, borderline and non-borderline, acknowledge that this guy, whatever else he may or may not have done, he took care of himself, and he's now out of it, and he knows that that's what's healthy for him, and he's been damaged. He's been traumatized. I don't have to agree with what he says to have compassion for his experience. In the same way that I can have compassion for you, that you have a really challenging mental illness that I can't even I can only begin to imagine how horrible it is to live with and how difficult it is to be in relationships. But then you later come out and you attack him. You demean him. You depersonalize him. You laugh at him twice. You say, and you contradict yourself. You say one thing which sounds good. You say, not every person with borderline personality disorder is abusive to their partners. Well, we have to define abuse, because ghosting somebody, isolating from them, giving them the cold shoulder, not communicating, throwing your anger inwards when you're around them. Those are all abusive things. Just because you're not yelling and screaming and hurting them physically doesn't mean you're not abusing them. You're still devaluing them. You still don't want to connect with them. You're still pushing them away. It's still abusive. It's still demeaning. It's still devaluing to them, even though you're not acting out in that way. So I disagree with that. You say, not every person with BPD lets their illness have all the control. Now, I love that idea. I love the idea that you act contrary to your impulses, except you then do exactly the opposite of what you just said. You say, not every person with BPD lets their illness have all the control. A lot of people put in the work to have healthy relationships. Then you go on to say, your statement is pretty much saying people with BPD shouldn't be allowed to have healthy relationships, And that's gross. Laugh out loud. So you just called the person gross and you laughed at him derisively. There's no empathy there whatsoever. You took it personally, what he said. And then instead of saying, you could have said, just to give you an example, not that you have to do this, but you could have said, a lot of people put in the work to have healthy relationships. And your statement pretty much says people with BPD shouldn't be allowed to have healthy relationships. And that hurts me. That saddens me because I believe we deserve to be loved. And I try really hard. You could have said that. That would have engendered sympathy. That would have shown that you had empathy for that person and you were owning your own feelings. But what did you do? You turn around. You weren't just passive aggressive. You were outrightly abusive. This was emotional devaluation. You devalued the person. You called them gross. You laughed at them. And then you began to psychoanalyze them in a negative, judgmental way. If you don't have the capacity to be with someone who has trauma and BPD, then don't be. Please do not waste our time, laugh out loud. And you know that's nonsense. You don't believe that. That's not how you feel. You don't feel so superior that you're telling somebody to not waste your time. You're hurt by that. It hurts your feelings. You want people to love you. You want to have love in your life. You don't want people to feel the way this guy feels. And so instead of taking the opportunity to show them what you're trying to say, which is, listen, not everybody with BPD acts out destructively. In fact, I'll prove it to you. I feel for you. I'm sorry that you were in pain. And I want to make sure I don't do that to somebody. Thank you for sharing your feelings. Thank you for sharing your experience. That would have been the opposite. And that would have shown that you really did have empathy. You really did understand, and that you weren't devaluing and abusing somebody. Please don't waste our time, laugh out loud. And then you start demanding, telling people how to behave. You start controlling people. You say, don't tell everyone else, though, that it isn't worth the risk. He has the right to say whatever he wants. And here's the thing, you can't control what anybody says. Borderlines love to try and control people all the time. Don't say this, don't do that, do this, do that. So unfortunately, my friend, you have BPD and you are showing me in this instance, I don't know what you're like all the time, but in this instance, I can see that when you get your feelings hurt, one of your impulses is to belittle and attack, demean, and show a complete lack of empathy. So that in itself is traumatizing. That in itself, because in this case, it's pretty clear this guy's saying something that's pretty inflammatory. Don't ever get in a relationship with a borderline. Now, if I was a borderline, I wouldn't like that either. But it also tells me what happens when you're in a relationship with somebody and you feel that that's what they said when they didn't. Now, if you have BPD, we all know that that's a possibility that could happen. So this tells me that you're going to do that. The moment that you think somebody is feeling that way, from what I see here, you're going to derisively laugh at them. You're going to judge them. You're going to control them. You're going to devalue them. So is that quiet BPD? It's the same. The gaslighting, you don't have to be, a quiet borderline is perfectly capable of gaslighting, perfectly capable of devaluing, perfectly capable of being passive aggressive, which is very destructive, perfectly capable of being manipulative, perfectly capable of idealizing and then devaluing. When they split, instead of being Amber Heard and blocking your way and punching you in the face and throwing bottles at you and things like that, instead of doing that or taking a dump on your bed, the quiet borderline, if they're a borderline, they are going to split, which means internally they are going to be full of rage, hate, fear, devaluation, and projection. They are going to be, at the very least, passive aggressive, because being quiet, isolating, ghosting, refusing to communicate. These are all passive aggressive ways that are just as damaging and just as hurting. We get the same message. Doesn't matter if you're in our face telling you, you shut up, I can't stand you, you're fat and old, or if you're just not responding to us, not responding to our texts for days at a time, going inside and isolating for 4 hours because you can't tolerate being around the other person. We know the difference. We know the difference between somebody who's taking time to go and take a nice hot bath and then they come out and they're happy to see you, and somebody who is isolating because they hate your guts and they don't want to be anywhere near you. We know the difference. Just because you think that not expressing it somehow makes it, sanitizes it, it doesn't. So, there you go. Quiet borderline, just as destructive, and it's even more confusing because you're not yelling and screaming, it can even be more confusing. Let's see, what else? So I was going to look at the other one here. So this person is saying, you're damaging how we are perceived. So in other words, here's another borderline saying that this guy shouldn't say this. And I haven't given a thumbs up to what the guy said or not. I understand why he's saying it. I've been there. I can also understand why a borderline gets upset with what he said. But this idea that people, canceling people, this is cancel culture. You can't cancel people based on their opinion. You can't. You can't tell people to not have an opinion. And here's the reality. The reality is that BPD has a stigma, not because somebody said something. So in other words, the reality isn't that you're walking around with a safe form of BPD and somebody ends up, for whatever reason, they interact with you and they find out that you have BPD, or they don't, and decide that they don't like you and they say, you're destructive, you hurt me, you devalued me. You can't then turn around and blame that on some other guy's opinion and say, well, it's people like that, because he said that people with BPD are all like this and they shouldn't date. That guy doesn't have that much power. Nobody has that much power. You can't cancel somebody for sharing their experience and their belief based on their experience. Doesn't mean they're right. They could be 100% wrong. But people have to have the right. You can't tell somebody how to speak and how to feel. That's a very manipulative, controlling, borderline thing to do. And it's not accurate. If BPDs have a stigma, it's not because of that. It's because BPD is really destructive in relationships. The stigma comes from the actions. I personally don't care what somebody's diagnosis is. If they are able to act lovingly towards me, if they are able to act in ways that do not devalue me and make me feel valuable and worthwhile and lovable, I don't care what in fact, if I have that ability to love and be loved, and you have pain and you have a disability, I'm going to have compassion for you. The truth is that all of us, even this guy who's saying 100% don't get anywhere near BPDs, I can guarantee you that in his relationship, he went out of his way to be there and to love his partner. I can guarantee you that. I don't know the guy, but I already know that. And he was punished. He was devalued for the love that he showed. So that stigma doesn't come from because what somebody said. It comes from interaction. You say you're different. You have BPD, you have quiet BPD, you're different, you're not like them. The only way I would know that is if I was to interact with you. You would have to prove that to me. He has the right to think that, and if you really are different, then you don't need to cancel somebody and tell them what to say and what not to say. And somebody saying something and being inaccurate is not damaging or destructive. They're not creating some spell over the world that's going to, none of that's true. If you do have BPD and you are in therapy and you are self-aware and you do have the ability to act contrary to your splitting impulses and your negativity, and you're able, instead of attacking somebody saying, I'm feeling really vulnerable and I'm really scared, and can you give me a hug? If you do something like that, we'll be like, oh, hell yeah. And then we would be able to proudly say, yeah, I'm with my partner. She has BPD, but she's in therapy and she shares her feelings with me and I take care of her. And so I'm sorry, I'm not going to co-sign that either. That he can't say that. It's damaging what he says. He's just one person sharing an opinion. He doesn't have that much power. And you have to own up to each one of us has to own up to our own behavior, BPD or not. And if you have BPD, then you have to at least be aware enough to realize that you have the potential to be very destructive, or that your symptoms have the potential to be very destructive. And if you're not able to do that, like I got to tell you, the other guy who's saying, I have quiet BPD, but I don't abuse anybody, I don't hurt anybody. And for you to say that to me, we don't need you, you're stupid and gross. And well, you just showed me that you are abusive. When it suits you, you can be abusive. All right? So is BPD actually a quieter, less destructive form? I can tell you from personal experience, hell no. I was the most damaged I've ever been in my whole life. Never have I experienced such horrific devastation. And there's a difference between somebody who has intimacy issues and somebody who's splitting on you, devaluing you, gaslighting you, ghosting you, got you on this merry-go-round. I mean, there's no difference. It just depends on what somebody's vulnerability is. I'm not the kind of person that you can get away with physically abusing me. I mean, that's not going to work. I'm going to be out of there in half a second. Johnny Depp, he's got a different interaction. He takes the abuse. I don't. I, on the other hand, have had a history of taking all kinds of passive-aggressive abuse, all kinds of really damaging psychological mind games and subtle devaluation and ghosting and neglect and all kinds of the stuff that is just horrible. There's nobody that's with an untreated BPD that comes out not horrifically damaged. It doesn't matter if you're quiet or otherwise. Now, I don't judge anybody just because they're quiet or not. I believe that everybody, if they really want to, can do something to change. So the fact that you're quiet or not quiet is irrelevant to me. What's meaningful to me is what you do. And so quiet, not quiet, and you think that therapy will help you, by all means, go do it. I fully support you. And I believe, as I've said, it's possible to be in a healthy relationship with somebody with BPD, assuming that they are busting their rear end to do the work. And I think that's what matters, not whether they're quiet or not quiet or anything else. So, all right. Excuse me. I beat that horse to death. So we'll leave it at that. I wish you guys all the best. Do the 4 things if you want to heal. Go no contact. Work all 12 steps with a sponsor. When you can afford it, work with a psychologist. Have a daily meditative practice. And I guarantee you, if you do that, you will heal. In fact, you don't believe me? Good. I challenge you to do it. Prove me wrong. The first 2 things, going no contact and working the 12 steps, won't cost you any money. And you can do it from home even. Go on a Skype. You can go on Skype. So prove me wrong. Do it fully. Do all 12 steps and then come back and tell me that didn't do anything. I dare you. All right. That's it. See you guys later. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe.